The worst nuclear disaster in history happened in Chernobyl, Ukraine, in 1986. The disaster caused an explosion that sent radiation around the world. It affected millions of people's lives forever. But do you know how it happened? How much did you learn about this disaster in school? Were you taught about what really went wrong, or were you just taught a basic overview? Today, we will be talking about the Chernobyl disaster. We will be going over some scary facts about the disaster that you may not have heard before. Let's get into the video. Number 10, a failed safety test. On April 25, 1986, a safety test was being carried out at the Chernobyl plant. At the time, the reactor was operating at a low power level. They wanted to see if the steam turbine could power up enough to run the plant's emergency feed water pumps without the help of any other systems. This is because these pumps are crucial if the water supply in the reactor starts to drop. If the pumps fail, then the core can overheat, which would lead to a meltdown. During the test, the operators of the plant had turned off most of the safety features of the reactor. These included things like automatic power controls and emergency shutdown systems. They disabled them so that they wouldn't interfere with their test. However, the test ended up failing, and things got out of control very quickly. Number 9, power rises, then drops. During the test, the power in the reactor started to fall, and the operators realized that something was going wrong. They tried to increase the power output again, but the more they tried to raise the power levels, the more unstable the reactor became. By 1:23 a.m., they had raised the power to twice its normal level. That's when the control rods couldn't control the reaction anymore, and it led to a massive power surge. Number 8, an unexplainable noise. Viktor Brakanov was working the night shift at the nearby Chernobyl meat processing plant. He heard a loud noise around 1:23 a.m., and he thought it was a jet flying overhead. He looked up into the sky and saw an orange glow. He didn't think anything of it until he heard sirens going off. Around 2 a.m., he saw workers from the Chernobyl plant running away from the plant. They were yelling that everyone should leave the area immediately. They were also telling people that they needed to take cover because there had been an explosion. It wasn't until later that morning that they learned the next morning that the explosion came from the plant. Number 7, no emergency plan. After the explosion, a plume of smoke was seen rising above the Chernobyl plant. It was only 50 meters tall at first, but it quickly grew to be 5 kilometers into the air. This plume of smoke contained radioactive particles that spread across Europe and even parts of the United States. For weeks after the explosion, the Soviet government denied that anything had happened. They didn't want people to panic, so they didn't share details of the explosion. This meant that no one was prepared for what was coming. When the full story did finally come out, it was clear that there had never been an emergency plan in place in case of an accident. This made the situation worse than it needed to be. Number 6, evacuation. Once word got out about the explosion, people started to evacuate the area. However, the evacuation ended up being poorly organized. Buses were supposed to be provided for the residents, but most people had to find their own way out of town. Many people left the city without taking anything with them. They simply grabbed whatever they could and ran for the hills. Doctors at the polyclinic on the outskirts of Pripyat told anyone who came in that they should head straight to the train station and get out of town. Within 2 days, Pripyat was completely abandoned. No one has lived there ever since. Number 5, the nuclear cloud. As we mentioned before, the smoke that came from the Chernobyl plant rose 5 kilometers into the air. It remained there for a week, turning into a giant mushroom cloud. This cloud spread radioactive materials all over the surrounding countries. Countries like Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine were the worst-hit areas. Radiation was also found in Sweden and even in the United States. The cloud ended up traveling around the entire northern hemisphere. Scientists today still don't fully understand how this happened. Number 4, the wolves. After the evacuation, scientists were worried about how the radiation would affect animals in the area. They sent teams of scientists into the abandoned zone to check on the animals. They found that the wolves in the area seemed to be the ones that suffered the most. They found that many of the wolves had very high amounts of radiation inside of them. The scientists called this the Chernobyl syndrome. Wolves weren't the only animals that were affected, though. Cows, horses, and pigs in the area also had high levels of radiation in their bodies. Number 3, thyroid cancer. People who were exposed to high amounts of radiation during the Chernobyl incident developed thyroid cancer years after the incident. The reason that they developed cancer so long after the fact was because they were exposed to radioactive iodine. Iodine is normally safe to consume, but when it's radioactive, it can cause serious health problems. Children under the age of 18 were especially vulnerable to the radioactive iodine. Back in 1986, the UN estimated that 237 children had developed thyroid cancer due to the Chernobyl explosion. Number 2, liquidators. 800,000 people were brought in to clean up the mess after the Chernobyl explosion. These people became known as liquidators. They worked to contain the radiation and clean up the area. They buried the radioactive debris in a special concrete structure. They also worked to bury all of the radioactive materials that were in the reactor. To this day, the liquidators are considered heroes because they saved thousands of lives by cleaning up the mess. The liquidators also helped to save the nearby cities from becoming uninhabitable. If they hadn't cleaned up the radiation, the whole country would have been stuck in the same position as Fukushima. Number 1. Water containment. One of the biggest challenges that the liquidators faced was containing the water. There were 3 large pools of radioactive water that needed to be dealt with. 2 of the pools were near the destroyed reactor, and the 3rd pool was where the radioactive materials were being stored. The liquidators built a canal that led away from the storage site. They then used pumps to move the water into the canal. From there, they took the water to a containment facility that had been built specifically to hold the radioactive water. They continue to pump the water into the facility to this day. They hope that one day they'll be able to use the water for something else, but for now, it's too dangerous. We hope you enjoyed learning about the Chernobyl disaster. What was your favorite fact? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to stay tuned if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.